Hey, next week is CES, and one of the cameras that seems to be on the talking points of that show is the GH5-S. Will it be announced? I think so. All right, so basically, there have been a lot of articles that I've seen that pretty much the GH5S specs are leaked. And at the CES show, it's going to be announced, and we're going to get a good view of that camera. Now, I took my time to look at the specs that the GH5 have and compare it to the rumored GH5S specs to see the comparison, to see if this camera is really worth an upgrade before it's announced, and then we'll take a look at it after the true specs are announced and we can see the pros and cons. But I pretty much printed out and took notes, wrote down everything. And let's start with the announced GH5S specs and what improvements they are compared to the GH5. Now, among all the specs, I'm really going to focus on the improved specs and tell you the difference between that and the regular GH5. Now, let's start off with the first point. The camera records at Cinema 4K, 60p, 100 megabits per second at 422 10-bit internally. Now, when you compare that to the GH5, actually the GH5 could only do 24 frames a second at 400 megabits per second, all I, 10-bit 422 recording. Now, it's going up from 24 all the way up to 60 frames per second, though that's going to be at a lower bit rate. That's pretty incredible. As far as I know, the GH5 can only do the 60 frames per second at 422 10-bit if you plug in an external recorder. If not, it's going to do 8-bit 420. So that's a pretty impressive upgrade. So that's something that seems to be worth it. Moving on, the camera can record slow-mo full HD at 240 frames per second. Now this is up substantially from 180 frames per second from the GH5. My opinion on this is that I didn't see any mention of the bit rate that you get out of 240 frames per second. So I'm wondering if there is a bit more quality loss, or will they actually up the bit rate for 240 megabits per second? That way you can still get a much better looking image. Okay, next up, and this is one of the most important changes, the megapixel count is down from 20.3 megapixels all the way to about 12 megapixels. Now this is important so that the sensor can capture more light, and it seems that the GH5S is meant to be more of a low light GH monster than the GH5 was. GH5 was, as we all know, that micro four thirds sensor struggles in low light scenarios, but the GH5S will look to address that. Okay, the next thing is the ISO is going to be expanded. The ISO range from the GH5 was 100 to 25,600. The GH5S is going to be from 160 to 51,200, and it's going to be expandable to 80, from 80 to 102,400. So a couple of more stops of expandable range there that you'll get from the video. My thought is, how will that look when it comes to noise performance? What's going to be that level where we can no longer stomach the noise that's produced? I can tell you, once I'm at 3200 on the GH5, I'm already saying that that's above where I want to be at. But if this is improving the low light capabilities, perhaps we may be able to push that further. So I'm looking forward to that. As far as the rest of the specs, I didn't see anything much different from that of the GH5. The one thing that I see that's been taken away is, of course, the 6K photo mode and no anamorphic lens mode, and that would be because you have a smaller megapixel count and it's not a 6K sensor, so it's not going to go that high. And if you can't get that high of a resolution, there's no point in anamorphic. So those features, which makes sense, are going to be removed, but you'll still have 4K photo mode in there, which is good. So that's looking at the GH5S specs. But then I refer back to the GH5 to see what actually is missing, what wasn't addressed or at least mentioned in the leaked spec leaks, and where I still have questions. So starting off with the GH5 at least offered up a paid upgrade for Vlog. There was no mention of Vlog being included with the GH5S, or if that will be another paid upgrade. It would be nice if they actually included Vlog with the system, so we'll have to look out for that. But I would anticipate that it's still probably going to be a paid upgrade. Dual SD card slots. Now, the GH5S did say that it would have dual SD card slots, but the question is, will they still be UHS-2? There was no mention of that. It told you what SD card types, but no mention of whether it supports UHS-2. I would think, yeah, that's a no-brainer. It's going to have to, especially with the higher bit rates for the higher resolution video. Also, what wasn't mentioned are all of the other, will there be any improvements on the other video modes? Down from, of course, what the best one is, of course. Like, will we still have 400 megabits per second on the UHD footage on 30 frames per second, and so on and so forth, and the lower resolution and frames per second modes. I anticipate that it will. It's kind of a no-brainer as well, but there's no mention of that. And that wasn't really mentioned when the GH5 specs were released, at least last time. So it's just another thing. And also, last but not least, is 5-axis in-body stabilization. There was no mention of the sensor stabilization. No mention of the sensor stabilization. Now, I would think that that is going to be in there. That's, again, a no-brainer. They've got the science to put it in there, but it wasn't mentioned, and that's kind of weird because of all the specs. I mean, the spec list that at least was leaked is pretty long. I don't know if you can see this, but it was pretty long. Now, when you compare that to the fact that that's one thing that's glaringly left out, what's the deal? Where's the in-body stabilization? Is kind of hard to say, but it's a question. It makes a no-brainer. They should include that in there, but it's weird that they didn't. So I thought that was noticeable, but there you go. Rumors say that it's going to be announced at CES next week, so we'll have to look out for that, see what happens. And do I think that I'd get this GH5S? Well, I'll tell you this much. GH5 has been a great camera, not used in many scenarios, but I've used it in a few scenarios. I could say that it's, again, not my favorite camera because of the autofocus and other issues, especially the color balancing gets on my nerves, but still a great camera. I find no reason to upgrade. I've got a full frame body and APS-C sensor body that do excellent jobs in low light. To upgrade my GH5 with the improved video modes, but in Micro Four Thirds, I don't see a use for it. I actually don't have a problem with the current video modes that are offered by the GH5, which are still incredible. A lot of filmmakers and a lot of vloggers have actually been fine with shooting at a pretty stable frame rate at 1080p, 60 frames per second, and some a little bit faster. But other than that, it's that full frame look and the color science that you get from a Canon that I particularly enjoy. Panasonic's colors are great, but again, there's no comparison when it comes to Canon, in my personal opinion, of course. But what do you guys think? Again, for me personally, totally happy with the GH5. Not angry that they're releasing a different version. And I do believe that this camera its in-body stabilization is actually the feature that I bought this camera for, and it came with it, so I'm totally happy with that. So again, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Like, share, and as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. And once again, hit that little bell icon so you get notified of my videos. Take care, guys. See you later.